Hi, my name is Maria Montes, and I wanted to share with you a guest lecture I recently gave as part of the Principles of Typeface Design led by Troy Leinster at Type at Cooper in New York City. And I thought the lecture could be very beneficial for other graphic design students and also mid-career professionals who are considering studying typeface design, but they don't see themselves as a full-time typeface designers, because this is exactly my case. And this presentation is focused on how I'm using my typeface design skills in my current graphic design practice. So before I go into the visuals of the presentation, I want to give you a little bit of an overview about myself and my background. I'm originally from Barcelona, and I moved to Australia in 2006 with no friends, no family, and very, very little knowledge of the English language. So the move was very, very challenging for me. I felt quite isolated, especially the first 2 years, but then things got better and better. And thanks to the Australian experience, a lot of good things have come to me. The experience is so positive that after 15 years, I'm still in Australia. So this is a little bit of myself. And then I want to also talk about the context of the presentation. So the goal for me to come to Australia was two things. Number one was learning English. Number two was working as a graphic designer overseas. And number three, of course, the result of these two things was going to be strengthen my portfolio. The ultimate goal for me, the end up goal of all of these, was actually moving into New York City and working and make a living in there as a creative, as a designer. Now, the presentation starts in 2011. So what happened was I arrived in 2006. I was sponsored as a graphic designer in 2007. That's the reason I could live in this country after a few months being an English student full time. And then I worked in Australia as a graphic designer for 2 years for a studio. At the end of 2008, I felt very unsatisfied. Although I had accomplished everything I wanted to in Australia, I felt like my graphic design portfolio was not strong enough. I felt like I had more to give and I didn't know how. So I decided to specialize. I was not too sure if going into into illustration or typography. And in the end, I chose typography. So I knew there was a postgraduate course in typeface design in Barcelona at the same university that I studied graphic design. So I checked the program. I saw the name of my calligraphy teacher, Keith Adams, and that sparked a fire inside me, because I clearly remember learning calligraphy from him in 1996, which is like a lifetime ago now, and how much I loved it and how much I enjoyed it. And apart from Keith Adams, there were many other teachers and professionals that I very much admired. So I decided to go back to Barcelona, which was a very good way of connecting back to my culture after many years in Australia and going back to study. So the presentation starts here in Barcelona in 2011, doing my first experience learning for the first time typeface design. I'm going to share now the screen. Just a sec. Okay, let's go. So my first experience at Typeface Design looks like that. And this typeface design in progress is called Me Wash. It's inspired by a Polish real briefing that I chose at that time. And this is as far as I got with my typeface design work. I loved it. I made huge connections, very, very good friends that I still have today. It brought back all this passion I had lost in graphic design. Then after the course, I realized that calligraphy was actually a really, really good tool, not only because I personally loved it, but also because it was helping me to be a better graphic designer. The practice of calligraphy improved my visual literacy, improved my spacing and kerning skills. So from that moment onwards, I decided to practice calligraphy every morning before doing anything else. I went back to Melbourne, and I was living in Brisbane before, so I was completely new in the city of Melbourne. I didn't know anyone except my partner. So I was determined to find a job as a typographer after my postgraduate course, but then something completely different came on board. So a friend of mine, a fashion designer from Barcelona, emailed me and offered me a collaboration to design scarves for global fashion labels. I knew nothing about textile design, although it was a passion of mine in my early years, but I really needed to work. So I said yes. As you can see in this example, the first prints were very graphic, but then things started to get more illustrative and more complex. So I was new in the city. I was working from my own bedroom. I was using Google and YouTube to learn as much as I could about how to become a professional textile designer. And the type passion didn't go anywhere. It was still there, but this was a priority for me because I needed to make a living. In 2011, at the end of that year, I met Troy Leinster, and he was, I believe, in the first class of the condensed program of Typeface Design at Type at Cooper. He told me the great things about Type at Cooper, how much he learned, how much he enjoyed it, the whole experience, the quality of the teachers. So I decided that I wanted to do it. At that time, I was very fortunate because I was doing full-time job as a textile designer, and I also had the flexibility to choose my holidays. So I used all my holidays for the year. I applied for the program, I was accepted, and I spent all my holidays in New York City learning more about typeface design. And it was great. One of my main teachers was Jean-Francois Poches, and he pushed us really hard, which it only made it more exciting about learning more, asking heaps of questions, making sure that I'm taking the most out of the course that I paid for. This is my second attempt at typeface design. It's called March 22, and it's also my second unfinished typeface design. After that, I went back to Australia and I kept designing textiles. Things were going really well. Things were getting more and more complex. Thanks to the typeface design program, I actually realized that the process of designing a font is a very long process. And in contrast, my process of designing textile design was a very, very quick turnaround of 3 to 4 days. So I started to become very interested in lettering because lettering was a much shorter process, but still involving letter forms. So this is my first attempt at lettering. It is designed in vectors and heavily inspired by one of the early pieces from Gemma O'Brien, which is an Australian designer and artist that I very much admire since I found her. I realized that lettering was maybe closer to my ideal practice because it was a much shorter process, but everything I learned in typography was extremely helpful to understand how to work with letter forms in the lettering environment. Now, I kept designing textiles, and this one is one of my latest designs at that time. We sometimes were creating self-initiated designs to show the clients, and because we were designing scarves, not all the time had to be a repeat. The designs didn't have to be an all over because a scarf is basically a canvas, and the designs can be very much like artworks. The detail on this feather, I can completely say that this is completely inspired by my typeface design practice. Now, independent designer. I became an independent designer by accident. I wasn't planning to be a freelancer, but in 2014, I got an email from the Mongolian company we were collaborating with to produce our scarves. And they emailed me to tell me that they couldn't keep me on the books. So all of a sudden, I lost everything. I lost all the clients we were designing for, just like in a second, basically. So at that time, I was starting to use Instagram, and I was posting a few of my textile design jobs. And that's how I got my first freelance textile client. This brand is called Hue, is based in Melbourne, Australia, is an independent label. And it was really exciting to all of a sudden be collaborating with independent people like me, being on the same page, discovering what the concept of the collection was. And for me, it was the feeling of truly collaborating with someone else instead of designing for global companies. This is the second textile design client I found in Melbourne, also an independent label called Chorus. This label was incredibly experimental and brave, and we had a lot of good results out of our collaborations. And this is another Australian label called Retro Prints. And this design is actually, as you can see, for lamps. So it was very, very good to see my work not only on scarves, but also on homewares. Now, how did I get my first graphic design client? Was via Behance. So I also published my work in that platform, and there was a London-based agency who saw my former vector feather I showed before, and they used it to pitch a really big project. They won the pitch, and the art director was honest enough to actually email me and told me, look, Maria, we used your feather to pitch for this project. We won the project, and now I want you to craft our new feather. So this is how the feather is used in place. It's for a 5-star luxury hotel in the middle of London. My work is only the feather. The lettering, I believe, is done by Troy Leinster and digitized by my teacher, Laura Messeguet. And this is how they speak to one another. Calligraphy was still very close to my daily practice, so I kept going. I was experimenting with different styles. At that time, I started a new personal project called the Sheet Series, and I was playing with a lot of expressions using the word sheet and exploring language. And calligraphy was actually filling an avenue of highly creative output without being commercial, but it played a very good role into keeping myself motivated. I wanted to learn more about lettering, and I didn't want to lose my skills in illustration and textile design. So I started to think about combining everything all together. And this is how my first illustrative cocktail artwork was born. This is a lettering part of a piece called A Bloody Mary a Day Keeps the Doctor Away. After this piece, I decided to develop a few other pieces. And by my surprise, at the end of 2015, a cocktail venue in Melbourne offered me to host my first solo exhibition, which is something that it was so far away from my dreams as a graphic designer that it was not even in my radar that this was possible for me. So this was one of my highlights of my life, I think, at that time. One of these illustrated cocktail artworks was a French one called Absinthe. And this lettering got a lot of attention on social media, on Instagram. I got a lot of comments, and one of my friends actually mentioned, hey, Maria, you should totally turn this lettering into a font. And the moment she said that, something like really lightened up inside me again. And then I told myself, all right, yeah, I am actually going to do this, because I'm someone that tries really hard with my personal work to finish everything I start, as is everything. It's very easy to get lost in your own personal work because there is no real deadline. There is no one to making you accountable. So my first font in Barcelona was never completed. My second typeface design in progress at Type at Cooper was never finished. And this was the third attempt. And I thought to myself, this is going to be the one that I am going to complete. And it's not going to be a big deal because, you know, it's only an uppercase design. It's only one weight. It's going to be really straightforward. So, well, the straightforward process lasted maybe just a couple of weeks until I shared this project with a colleague of mine called Jamie Clark. And he said to me, oh, Maria, this font would be so good for a chromatic font. And I was like, a chromatic font, what is that? So, well, I learned about chromatic fonts and I learned more about chromatic fonts. And yes, the process was not so simple anymore. The font turned into a 7 weights chromatic font family, highly ornamented for display purposes. This means that, as you can see on this animation here, every layer or style is stacked on top of each other to create multiple chromatic styles. Green Fairy has 4 chromatic weights and also has 3 combined weights for all these occasions when you only need one single color in your font applications. I saw my font printed and released for the first time at the end of 2017, and that was another very high moment. The font was not published yet, but I started to work towards the marketing of the font and preparing a lot of font in use examples. This one in here is a real bottle with real olive oil. I printed the label, and then I asked a friend of mine to shoot the images of this one as well as the wine labels. My font told me a lot about myself and a lot about what it means to publish a font and how slow and detail-oriented and time-consuming it was. The font also gave me the opportunity to share my work with a huge audience in Australia in front of 700 people. So I'm really happy I went all the way with this experience. Now, how was I able to design a font and publish it with everything else going on as an independent designer? So the only reason I could do that is because at that time, I had started to teach calligraphy. And in 2017, there was a huge trend on calligraphy and lettering and any type of lettering, brush lettering, hand lettering, everything like that. At that time, I was already teaching in Australia and I had all my courses for 2017 sold out. So I realized that I could sustain myself only with my teaching. And that's when I took the decision to stop all my client work and focus 9 months full-time into my font. It was very lucky at that time that I could make a living out of teaching only. And I was very fortunate that I could complete the project and publish the font. So from here, after I published my font, I was still working with personal projects. I was still ongoing with my sheet series. I was developing my lettering skills. I was also working on my illustration skills. And I was also using my typographer skills. And calligraphy was still part of my personal practice. So a lot of my combined skills were coming up together. Now, how does this happen in commercial and in a commercial framework? So this is just an example of my first font, the font I designed in New York City, called March 22. I actually use the font on this tagline, and the most important part for me of this design is the sentence, the best quality goods always make you happy. So this is my first time actually printing an unfinished typeface design and putting them in a commercial context. Then how do I use my typeface design skills into my graphic design work? So I do a lot of custom logotype designs, and these logotypes are built using either RoboFont or Glyphs. In my case, I use Glyphs. So I use the same process of drawing typeface digitally as when I'm drawing logotype. In here, also, the sentence adventure game is actually my first unfinished typeface design in Barcelona in 2011. So my typefaces appear every now and then in commercial works and give me this extra input of like, it's just like a small win for myself. I studied also an MA in UI design a long time ago, so I can put all this knowledge into practice on this project, because I designed several interfaces for the video game, and also I designed the icon set, which I can totally do as well using Typeface Design software for it. This is an example of another logotype where my lettering and calligraphy skills and typeface design skills are all in place, as well as this logotype that is heavily influenced by copperplate calligraphy. As I mentioned before, I normally design logotypes or logo marks using typeface design software. And also when I prepare a presentation, I just need to type the character where I have designed the lettering in, and I place that on a PDF file and I submit it to the client. If the client decides to open my PDF file with Illustrator, the only thing they are going to see is the character I have used. So if I design fluid in lowercase a, when they open the Illustrator file, the only thing they will open will be like a Arial lowercase a. So in this way, my vector work is completely protected through the entire process until the final deliverables. More examples of logotype work using my typeface design skills, and also using my illustration skills, as this project require not only a logotype refresh, but applying native botanical Australian illustrations onto the packaging. So both elements were part of the project. This is a chalk lettering. This is a co-working creative space in Melbourne. My partner opened this space in 2014, and I chose the name. I did the chalk lettering, and was incredibly rewarding to see my work in a big size, of course, when normally I'm working like really high up detail. This is another example of a vector monogram combining a letter T and a letter C. It is highly detailed and illustrative as well, but this is also done using glyphs. And this is a very common practice in graphic design. So some of my clients might not have the budget to create a custom font for the project. They might not also have budget to create a custom lettering logotype, but then they want to customize a font. So in this case, we chose a very beautiful monospace font. We purchased the license. We also purchased the license for using the font as a logotype. And after that, we customized the characters to make sure that the logo is still completely unique. So all of this process, the spacing, the kerning, the customization, the understanding how the characters work, this is all coming thanks to my typeface design education. So I might not be a full-time typeface designer, but the education stays with me and I apply the education constantly. In this case, my only work is only the logo mark. So this water drop shape, it's also built in glyphs. And in my opinion, the counterforms, which is the negative space, which is the space between the leaves, is as important as the leaves itself. And this is something that I very much learn while drawing type, and understanding that the moment you draw a letter form, you are also drawing the space between the letter forms. So that negative and positive, or foreground and background, are two volumes with the same amount of importance. So basically, typeface design has taught me how to read the background as much as how to read the foreground. This is another logo mark, very, very detailed. This one is created in Illustrator because there was a specification about creating an offset embossed and gold foil applications. So each of these reproductions have three different technical aspects, and I had to be looking at the stroke weight and the space between the strokes constantly. So I had to be looking at the final shape and modifying the stroke weights. But the attention to detail comes from my typeface design background. Good things that can happen sometimes: your digital work can turn into actual physical amazing jewelry pieces, like this is the case. And then another example of a logo mark and applied into packaging. This project never saw the light. Now, how do self-generated work is playing a big role into my commercial work? So during my years starting out as an independent designer, I realized that a lot of my self-generated work was informing and dragging attention to then become commercial work. So I realized that this part of my practice was as important as my commercial practice. So I always make sure I have a very small but very protected space on my daily practice or my weekly practice to devote time for self-generated work. I recently heard an interview with Marta Sardà, which is a designer from Barcelona I very much admire, talking to, just a second, it will come to me, Martina Flor. They have a podcast interview, and Marta Sardà talks about using her pro bono work or her highly experimented work as a visual menu. That means that sometimes your clients might not have the language to express what they want or what they want to acquire as an outcome, but by having a lot of these experimentations published, it's helping her to communicate with the client what they are looking for. So it looks like when you go to a country that you don't speak the language and you need to go to a restaurant when they have photographs of the dishes, and you literally go there and pick the dish and hope that it will taste as good as it looks like. So in my case, my personal work is very much working in the same way that Marta Sardà described. This lettering called Cava is part of an illustrated cocktail artwork as well, and this has helped me to get a lot of logotype work in. My calligraphy practice still is very much part of my personal practice. This is part of my sheet series, as I mentioned before, and then this also is part of my personal practice, which is a lettering piece, vector lettering piece, that then turns into a hand-drawn skateboard deck. This has happened many times before because I'm working on a collection of decks, and each year is different number, which belongs to my partner and I anniversaries. This is the same process. So this started as a calligraphy sketch, then I scanned the original, I forced the scan to pixelate, and once I obtained the image, I printed out, and then I hand painted again on my decks. Now, these decks have been going on for many years now, and it was incredibly rewarding to see them part of a solo exhibition in Spain for La Panera in 2018, I think, and for Tarragona T2 in 2018. I think, I'm not too sure about the years now, but I think it's 2017 or 2018 and 2019, I think. So seeing part of my work, my personal work, part of an exhibition is for me sort of like the signal of that everything I'm personally driven by is going to end up being part of my professional practice. This was the name of the exhibition. Now, more things that are part of my personal practice. A couple of years ago, in the middle of the pandemic, I was asked to be part of a podcast series by the platform Typism. and the title was Finding Your Inner Compass. I did heaps of research before the interview, and after we recorded the conversation, I realized that these my notes could turn into a very helpful article. So I wrote the article and gave all the resources from my research. And after doing that, this talk also the article then became a talk by A Type I in 2021. So things work around in circles, and everything you put out, or most of what you put out, it will come back to you. So this is another example of how I use my lettering work. And then this is being drawn in glyphs and use a highly illustrative motif in the background. Another types of lettering that are not vectorized, brush lettering, and sort of like a classic copperplate application. And again, this is another example of lettering done in glyphs using Typeface Design software, using all my skills about spacing, ligatures, flourishes, rhythm, tension, and balance, which are all things that I learned at Type at Cooper and at my postgraduate course in Barcelona. I also play with tactile lettering. This is literally like cardboard cards, and created a monogram. And also I keep applying my graphic design skills into everything I do, even if it's personal practice. Like in this case, I printed out and offer that on my online store. So I want to use all my skill sets. I have been working from a creative co-working space in Australia for 7 years. And recently I had a very talented friend of mine called Will Hunt teach me how to animate with After Effects. And this is my first piece. Okay, what now? So I have been in Australia for 15 years. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, it's been an incredible journey. I'm very, very fortunate that I'm able to still work as a graphic designer, as well as implement my knowledge from typeface design, from illustration, from textile design, and from lettering in my commercial practice. This is what I was talking about before when I mentioned about a visual menu. This is an example of my visual menu in letter forms. It helps me to work with clients. It helps me to communicate with them. And it also makes me a better designer. So I hope this presentation has been very helpful to show you that I'm still working as a graphic designer, but all these skills are coming together via logotype, logo marks, packaging design, or any other expression. The last thing I want to say is that calligraphy is still part of my practice. I have been teaching calligraphy since 2014, and I'm currently still teaching. And I always make sure that I remember to never stop learning. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope this was very helpful. You can find more examples of my work on my website, mariamontes.net, or on social media, especially on Instagram. And I'm gonna stop now sharing. And if you have any comments or if you have any questions about the presentation, please let me know. Thanks for your attention.